Professor. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
Senator Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to each of you for being here. Chief Justice John Roberts, in his majority opinion in the case that we're discussing today, noted that, quote, this case is the first criminal prosecution in our nation's history of a former president for actions taken during his presidency. Look, we wouldn't be here today if the progressive left, after trying not once but twice to impeach President Trump, brought the first criminal prosecution of a former president in our nation's history based on acts undertaken during his presidency. And they all celebrated the politicization of federal and, in many cases, state prosecutors when all this happened. Now, look, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, some of them at least who we've heard from, one could argue that they made up their mind about this case long before reading the briefs, much less the opinion or even the cert petition, just based on one name, on the name Donald Trump. The fact that the petitioner in that case was named Donald J. Trump meant that they were going to be against whatever it is that he argued and any court ruling that maybe came down on his side. But look, all of this is part of a pattern and practice of lawfare, a mechanism by which a number of prosecutors, including many elected prosecutors who ran specifically on the platform of criminally prosecuting Donald J. Trump and have prosecuted on going after other people whose political views that they don't like. And so in this respect, it reminds me a little bit of what our colleague, Senator Chuck Schumer, did to threaten two members of the Supreme Court, Justices Kavanaugh and Gorsuch, when he went to the steps of the Supreme Court back in 2020, and he delivered this choice soundbite. Quote, I want to tell you, Gorsuch, I want to tell you, Kavanaugh, you have released the whirlwind, and you will pay the price. You won't know what hit you if you go forward with these awful decisions. So look, the left knew their preferred outcome, in this case, based on the criminal defendant, on the petitioner before the Supreme Court, before the first arguments were made at the earliest stages. This is something that we need to look to. Now, some of my colleagues have commented today about the legitimacy of the opinion, including suggesting that it was borne out neither by a textualist nor an originalist analysis of the constitutional text in question. Professor Mascott, I'd like to start with you. Tell me what you think of that assessment that this is somehow counter-textualist or counter-originalist for the court to have reached this conclusion regarding presidential immunity.
Thanks, Senator Lee. Well, as the opinion notes, it's based on longstanding structural understandings of the constitutional system. For example, we have a concept of sovereign immunity. The government itself has a little bit has a well of immunity, and the president and the vesting of the executive power in the vesting clause has inherent immunity. And this is the doctrine that was recognized decades and decades ago, repeatedly by the Supreme Court, albeit in the civil context, and even during the Clinton administration and before. And it's essential to the president to be able to do his job. Not that every action he's going to take is always going to be deemed legal. There are plenty of ways to challenge actions in court, to enjoin actions, to go against the action itself, to defund actions, to impeach and convict a president, but not to subject him to criminal prosecution for doing his job.
So in other words, they're not making this up. It is rooted in text. It is rooted in the structure. But there are centuries-old precedents that we rely on, some of which predate the founding of our republic. Is that right?
That's correct. And in the concept of executive power itself, properly historically understood.
And the President of the United States is himself the living embodiment of the executive branch.
That's correct. He's the only individual who sits at the top alone of a branch of government.
Right. And so these things were born of necessity many centuries ago, in many cases before the founding of our republic, but were understood at the time the Constitution was written. General Mukasey, when you look at what would happen if we didn't have this doctrine, even if we just didn't have this ruling, let's say if the outer perimeter category identified by the Supreme Court, that seems to be attracting a lot of the scrutiny today, if that did not exist, how would that impact the American people through the route of presidential actions? In other words, if a president, let's say, for example, President Clinton, when deciding to order a military strike that happened to arise at the same time certain scandals were erupting surrounding Monica Lewinsky, if that could subject him to some type of criminal prosecution, or a grant of a pardon at the same time somebody else had an interest, as you mentioned in the case of Mark Rich. What kind of impact would that have on the American people through their president if presidents had to look over their shoulder constantly in evaluating their own personal future stake in this and what could subject them to criminal prosecution?
Well, in the case of the attack that President Clinton authorized, which was decried by some people as a diversion, obviously the security of the people would be compromised because there would be hesitation over the order to direct that attack, notwithstanding that it was designed to protect the people of the United States from foreign hostile actors. As far as the pardon, that if that was a legitimate exercise of presidential authority, the ability to grant pardons and would itself be compromised.
In other words, we would be opening up a hornet's nest. This would be a Pandora's box, to put it mildly, that we would be opening if we didn't have this.
Presidency would be whittled away by repeated considerations of possible future consequences.
Thank you.
Senator Rono.